I'm going to demo the new Diagnosis Dialog to you today. Whenever you upgrade to 5.1 or higher, you will automatically get the new dialog that I'm about to show you. The new diagnosis checklist will look like this in a note. You'll notice that it looks similar to the redesigned checklist from last year. To open the checklist, click the Open icon, the one that looks like a document. This is what the new diagnosis dialog will look like. It is broken down into two sections. The left side of the screen is going to give you information pertaining to the current patient that you are viewing. You'll see, as we see now, that there will be a section called Chart Diagnoses, and this will show you any active, inactive, pre-existing, etc. diagnoses that are on that patient's chart. Once you start working with this checklist and adding new diagnoses, we will then see a different section show up there on the left, and at that point it will say Encounter Diagnoses. So if you're trying to view any information for this patient specifically, that will be the left side of the screen. The right side of the screen is the equivalent of the diagnosis checklist that you were using in previous versions. However, as you can see, it is completely redesigned. The first thing that you may notice is that we are now allowing you to add tabs so that you can organize your diagnoses in an easy fashion. Also, within those tabs, you will then have sections for ICD-10, ICD-9, and any diagnoses that do not have codes associated. I do not have any visible here, but if we had a code that did not have an ICD-9 or 10 map to it, then we would see an additional section under the ICD-9 area, and it would say no code specified. If you are looking at this dialog immediately after upgrading, you will most likely only have one tab visible, and that tab will be named Unspecified. You will have the ability to modify the name of that through Template Editor. If you would like to navigate through the different sections, you can do so by clicking on the name at the top of that tab, and that will display whatever is configured for that individual tab. Now, my checklist is pretty basic, so there's not too much information on the screen, each screen. However, if you have a lot of information on an individual screen and you'd like to minimize so that you can read another section, you can do so by clicking on the blue arrows that you see to the right. If you click on that arrow, it will minimize the section, and then if you want to open it back up again, you would just click on the arrow again. Likewise, the blue arrow in the middle of the screen will also minimize that chart diagnoses section, and if you want to bring it back, you just click on the arrow again and then it will be displayed. Now let's talk about adding a diagnosis to the chart that is pre-configured in the checklist and is not already on the patient's chart. So to do so, you would click the plus sign next to the diagnosis. You can do so and you will see the Add to Problem List dialog. Now this dialog is the same that you have seen prior, so there are no changes on here. You can do all the same functionality. Once you're done with this dialog, you would click OK, and you will see that show up on the left side of this dialog, and it's now showing under Encounter Diagnoses. So it should be very easy for you to tell which diagnoses were entered through this note and which diagnoses were previously on the chart. The diagnoses that were modified today in this note will show under the Encounter Diagnosis section, and the diagnoses that were on their chart prior will be under Chart Diagnoses. If you accidentally added the wrong diagnosis, you can undo the addition by clicking the minus sign next to that diagnosis from the left side of the screen. So if I wanted to remove the ICD-9 for edema, I would click the minus. And as you can see, it just went away from the screen and we no longer see an Encounter Diagnosis section. At this point, I could add another one. Let's go ahead and add an ICD-10 just so that you can see the diagnosis screen will look exactly the same whether it's ICD-10 or ICD-9. So I'm going to click OK, and I'll see that added to my chart. Now if I wanted to modify what I just added, maybe I added edema but I wanted to write a comment and I forgot to do that, I could do so by clicking the Edit button, the one that looks like a little post-it note, and if I click that, it will bring me right back to that Add to Problem List dialog. And once I'm done, I can click OK. If I would like to end a diagnosis that is currently on the chart, I can do so by clicking the minus sign next to that diagnosis. So if I wanted to end the abdominal pain, I would click the minus sign, and it will take you to the same dialog that you had seen before in order to end this. You can click OK, and you will notice that it is no longer under the chart diagnosis section. It is now under the encounter diagnosis section because I did something with that diagnosis today. And since I see it under the resolved diagnosis section, I know that I successfully deleted it from this patient's chart. If I would like to continue or update a diagnosis that was previously on their chart, then I can do so by clicking on the little post-it icon next to that diagnosis. So if I was seeing them today and also addressing their hypertension, then I could click on the document, and that will give us the Note Diagnosis dialog. And again, this is exactly the same window as you had seen before. So from here you can change the observation that's noted, add comments, whatever you may need to do. When you're done, you can click OK, and you will see that that is now added under the Encounter Diagnosis section as an active diagnosis for today. Every time that I'm making a change, you will see it move from the chart diagnosis section to the encounter diagnosis section. Now, in essence, the minus sign and the little post-it note or the edit icon do the same thing, but it does depend on whether the diagnosis was added today or whether it was previously on the chart as to what you're actually doing. So I just wanted to show you, if we hover over each icon, you will get tooltips telling you what those buttons do. So if you are trying to click on the minus sign for a diagnosis that was added in today's chart, then you will see it say undo adding. So if I click on the minus sign here, it would just take it off as an active diagnosis. It never actually got onto the chart to begin with because I never clicked OK after adding it to the chart. If I hover over a diagnosis that I actually noted or updated today, which is what we did with the hypertension, then I'll see it say undo noting. If I click on the minus sign here, it'll just put hypertension back in my active diagnosis list, so it won't take it off the chart, but it will take it off as being updated in today's visit. If I highlight or hover over the minus sign under the chart diagnosis section, then I will always see that say end diagnosis. If I hover over the post-it note up here, it will allow me to edit a new diagnosis or edit a diagnosis that was resolved. Or if I hover over it under the chart diagnosis section, then it will just allow me to note that diagnosis. So the difference between the little post-it in the encounter diagnosis section versus the chart diagnosis is that if I'm doing it up here, I'm really just editing what I added today. And if I click on the post-it down here under the chart diagnosis section, then that means that I am using that diagnosis for today. This is equivalent to you clicking on the red plus sign in the previous version of our software. If I am done updating diagnoses for today, I can click the OK button, and I will see my chart and my progress note updated with that information. Now let's talk about an example where you would want to add a diagnosis that was not pre-configured in your diagnosis checklist. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the checklist again by clicking the Open icon. Previously, if you did not see your diagnosis in your list, you would use the Other button to search the database. We have replaced the Other button with the Search/Add Diagnosis button that you see at the bottom of the screen. That button will be in the same location no matter which tab you are viewing. So if I click on my dermatology or endocrine, I will see that it is in that same location. Okay, so let's go ahead and click Search. From within the search dialog, you will now have 3 tabs to choose from when you're searching: ICD-10 search, ICD-9 search, or Crosswalk. The ICD-10 search will allow you to search the database of ICD-10 codes, and you can either search by code or description. The ICD-9 search allows the same thing, except it's searching the ICD-9 database. And then the Crosswalk will allow you to search by ICD-9 code to find the appropriate ICD-10 code. Let's start out with the ICD-9 search, since that is what you're most familiar with and probably what you'll start with. So we'll click ICD-9 search. It will change your screen slightly. You should recognize this. It looks very similar to the previous way that you searched for ICD-9 codes. And you can either search by description or by code. And just to show you it works the same way, we can type in something by description and we'll see it show up, or we can go ahead and change that to code and type in the code instead. Once you find what you're looking for, you would highlight it and click OK. And then you will receive the same dialog to add your problem to the list. And you would click OK from here when you are done. And you will see your encounter diagnosis list updated on the left with that new ICD-9 code. Now let's go in and search for an ICD-10 code that was not configured in my checklist, so I need to go and search the database. So I'll start out by clicking Search/Add. And I'm in the correct tab. I'm in the ICD-10 Search tab. That will be the default whenever you come in this window. As you can see at the bottom here, you can search by code or description just like you could with ICD-9. So you'll set whatever column you want to search by, and then you'll start typing. You will see the results that match whatever you typed show up below where you were typing. Again, just like this ICD-9 search window worked. Now the main difference that you'll notice when you're searching for ICD-10 is that you do get these 2 additional sections with information. The middle section is the complete list of ICD-10 codes, and it is structured in a tree format. So you will have a higher level section that you then can click on the plus sign, and that will open up the lower level sections, and you can continue to do so until you do not see any more plus signs. The code that I was searching for over here on the left is automatically highlighted. So by searching on the left, the software automatically found that code for you and drilled down to it. The right side of the screen is going to give you detailed information about the diagnosis that you have highlighted. If you have a billable code highlighted, and by billable I just mean that it is the most drilled down, or it's the most specific version of that diagnosis. So if you have a billable code selected, this dialog will be focused at the bottom. If you scroll up, it will give you information pertaining to the diagnoses that come prior to this in this chapter. If you were to combine the middle screen and the right side of this screen, it would be equivalent to your ICD coding booklet. So once you have your ICD-10 code selected, you can click OK. And you'll get your Add to Problem List dialog, as we have seen before. And you can do all the same options that you had for ICD-9. And when you're done, you can click OK. It will then be added to your encounter diagnosis list on the left with the appropriate ICD-10 listed behind it. Now let's do an example where we are using the crosswalk to search for our ICD-10 code. I'll first just delete the shortness of breath so we can use that example again. So to use the crosswalk, you're going to click Search/Add Diagnosis, and then you'll click on the Crosswalk tab. This is going to look similar to the ICD-10 search screen, with the ability to search in the first column. The middle column will have the complete list of ICD-10s, and then the right column will have the information for each ICD-10 code. Please keep in mind that when you're using the crosswalk, your only option to search is by ICD-9 code. So if you only know the description, you would first want to go to the ICD-9 search tab, search by description, find the correct ICD-9 code, then come here to the crosswalk to do the mapping. So we do know our ICD-9 code for shortness of breath, so I'm going to go ahead and type that in. And what will happen is it will automatically drill down in the middle screen to that code and have it highlighted for you. So in this example, all we needed to do is type the code and it found it right away. And if that's what I was looking for, then I could click OK. And then OK again. Now let's discuss the template editing side of the new diagnosis checklist. So to get into template editor, we're going to go up to View and then Template List. And you would want to open up your progress note template or whatever template you have a diagnosis checklist in. I am just going to open up my template called Diagnosis to demo this to you today. The functionality that we're referring to is the DX list over here on the left side. Now, if you're creating a brand new diagnosis checklist, then you would want to highlight it and either click on the icon at the top there, or you can double click and it will insert a diagnosis checklist into your template wherever your cursor was. Keep in mind with the new functionality, you can no longer drag and drop to the left to delete. So if you want to delete something, you do need to highlight it and click backspace or delete on your keyboard. So this is what the new diagnosis checklist will look like in Template Editor. Previously, if you wanted to modify the properties of the checklist, you would right-click on the blue bar to do so. We have changed that functionality, and instead of right-clicking, you will now click on the little cog tool icon to get into the properties. So if you click there, you'll get your properties dialog, and from within here you'll have all the necessary fields for setting up a diagnosis checklist. So you'll still have the ability to modify the headings that print out whenever you do something with a diagnosis, removing it, updating it, etc. You will also have the ability to set whether you want it in a sentence format or in a list format by setting up the delimiters and conjunctions. You will also have the ability to decide whether those sections are being hidden or not. The end of list is still there so that you can put your \n so that you will have a double space in between this checklist and whatever comes next. And then the last thing that you can configure are the number of columns. You still are limited to a max of 4 columns. Take note that we remove the ability to add rows. You will have an unlimited amount of rows now, so it is no longer necessary to configure rows. Again, you will have a max of 4 columns that you can set. When you're done setting your properties, you can either click OK to save your changes or cancel if you do not want to save your changes. If you would like to add diagnoses to your checklist, then you would click on the open icon next to that cog tool. And this is what your diagnosis checklist will look like in Template Editor. The first thing that you'll want to start with is the group maintenance option at the bottom of the screen. Group maintenance is what allows you to configure the tabs that go along the top of the screen. If you are looking at a brand new checklist, the only tab that you will have at the top will be named Unspecified. It is not necessary to rename that if you don't want to. However, if you would like to rename it, you can come into here into Group Maintenance, click on the option that says unspecified, and then just start typing right over it, and you will change that name. To add a new group name or a new tab, click Add at the bottom. Then click where it says New Group and start typing the name of your group. If you'd like to add another one, click Add again, click New Group, and start typing. If you would like to change the order of your tabs, you can use the Move Up and Move Down arrows at the bottom of the screen. You would first highlight the group that you want to work with, and then either use the Move Up to move it up or the Move Down to move it down. If you no longer need one of your tabs, you can highlight it and click Delete at the bottom to get rid of it. When you're done, you'll click OK. And now we are seeing the new tab that we had just added for gastro. If I would like to configure diagnoses on that tab, I can click on gastro. And then at the bottom of the screen, I'll click Search/Add Diagnosis. You'll then get the diagnosis search screen giving you the option to search by ICD-10, ICD-9, or to use the crosswalk if you only know the ICD-9 code but you're trying to add the ICD-10 code. We'll go through all of those situations so that you can see each one. Let's start off with adding an ICD-9 code, since that's what you're most familiar with now. So to search for and add an ICD-9, you would simply just click ICD-9 search. And from here, you would either choose to search by description or code. I'm going to go ahead and search by code. And once I find what I'm looking for, I can click Add to Selected Codes. You'll see that it adds it at the bottom under your selected codes. And the nice thing about this is that it will allow you to continue adding codes without having to click OK and come back into this window. So I could continue to find other codes if I wanted something else and add that one as well. If you changed your mind and you didn't really want to add that code, you can highlight it at the bottom and click Remove from Selected Codes to remove it from your list. If you want to add an ICD-10 code now to your checklist, you can do so by clicking on ICD-10 Search at the top. Then you can type in your criteria that you're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and search by code again. And once I find it, I can click Add to Selected Codes just like I did with my ICD-9. So at the bottom, in the middle of the screen, you'll see Add to Selected Codes, and it will then add it to the selected codes at the bottom under the ICD-10 section. One of the great features that has been added to this new functionality for the ICD-10 is that we will give you the ability to configure the higher level ICD-10 codes into your template instead of having to configure all of the most specific codes. And by that I mean, if we look at this example for hemorrhoids, we see a lot of codes that it could possibly be. If we are unsure of the exact code that the provider may want to use, or if we think that all of these examples would be appropriate on any given day, instead of having to configure all of those directly in your template, you could just configure this higher level code for hemorrhoids in there. And what will happen is when you're in the patient's chart and you click on that K64, it'll give you the drop-down options of all the other codes that are below it at that time. And then you can pick whichever one is appropriate for the visit for that day. So let's go ahead and add one of these higher level codes into our template so that I can show you how that works on the flip side. Before we do that, let's go through one last example of adding diagnosis codes to your checklist by using the crosswalk. Now remember, the crosswalk is only needed if you only have the ICD-9 code, but you're trying to figure out what the ICD-10 code should be. So let's go through that example. So we'll click on Crosswalk. And then I'll start by adding my ICD-9 code that I'm searching for. And once I find the correct ICD-10, I can highlight it and click Add to Selected Codes. If I am done configuring the ICD-9s and the ICD-10s for this checklist, I can then click OK at the bottom. You will then see a new section for your ICD-10 codes and a separate section for your ICD-9. Now let's talk about organizing your diagnosis information on an individual tab. First, we'll talk about labels. This was a functionality that you previously had, and it is used to group the diagnoses so that it makes it easier for you guys to find them. So in order to add a label, you would just click Add Label at the bottom. And you would go ahead and type what your label is. And then you would select whether this label should go in the ICD-10 or the ICD-9 section. I'm going to put this in my ICD-10, so I'll click OK. Now what will happen whenever you create a label is that it will just put it into the next open spot that it sees. So if you would like to change the location, you can click on it and just drag it to where you would like it to go. And what will happen is that it will just move whatever you had dropped it onto down into the next spot. If you would like to change the order of anything else, you can click and drag. So if I really wanted my right upper quadrant pane to be under that section, I could click and drag it under headwards, and it will add an extra row for me. And if I decided that I wanted to change that again, I could click and drag it back. If you would like to remove a diagnosis code from this tab, you can do so by right-clicking on the code and selecting Remove. One last thing that I'd like to show you in here is the ability to move or copy diagnosis codes from one tab to another. If your diagnosis checklist has several tabs and you have the need to display the same diagnosis throughout several of those tabs, you do not need to go to each tab to add that code manually. You can add the code to one of the tabs, and then by right-clicking on that diagnosis code, you'll see the option to either copy to one of the other groups or move to one of the other groups. If you select the option to move this diagnosis code to another group, what it will do is it will remove it from this group and then put it into the other group. So in this example, I would be removing it from the gastro tab and adding it to the general tab. If you're choosing the option to copy, what it will do is it will simply copy this into the other group without removing it. So in this example, I would be leaving it on gastro and then also adding it to general. When you're done making changes to your checklist, you can click OK to save those changes and then close to save the changes for that template. Now let's go into a chart and take a look at what happens when we add ICD-10 codes, specifically when you're adding the higher level codes versus the billable codes. So to add a code, I'm going to click on the Open Dialog. And we're going to go to our Gastro tab because that's what we were working with earlier. When we were in Template Editor, we had added two different types of codes. We added a high-level code, and then we also added a billable code. I'll show you the billable code first since that's what you're used to seeing. So you can just click on the plus if you wanted to document this diagnosis for this patient today, and you'll get your Add to Problem List dialog, and click OK when you're done. Now, if we decide to click on one of those higher level ICD-10 codes, like we have here, instead of it taking you directly to the Add to Problem List dialog, it will first prompt you to select a billable hemorrhoid code. So from here, if you think the third degree hemorrhoids is the appropriate one for this patient, then you can just double click on that option, and then you will be presented with the Add to Problem List dialog. And you can click OK to save your changes. So you'll definitely see the benefit of this functionality if you have an abundance of codes and maybe you're not sure which ones are going to be necessary, or if you do truly use them all on a regular basis. You can add that higher level code to the template as your pre-configured option, and then the provider can select the more specific code, that billable code, when they are entering their note information. And that will save you some space on the screen as well as some template editing time. One last thing that I'd like to bring up is related to what we used to call the other button. Now, we mentioned earlier that we replaced the other button with the search/add diagnosis option, and we are seeing that at the bottom of the screen here. However, you do not have to come into this window in order to use that functionality. If you know that you just are going to need to search for the diagnosis, maybe the user does not like the tabs in the checklist, or they feel that searching is just faster for them, they can do so by clicking the plus sign here. They don't actually have to go into the checklist first to get to that. So again, if somebody just wants to search the database, they can do so by clicking plus, and it will immediately take them to the search screen.